Hello everyone, I'm Rin Salamander, and today I'm going to be talking about something just a bit different than usual. Now, I usually talk about otome. If otome are visual novels that are targeted at a female audience, shoujo games are the opposite. Visual novels targeted towards men. I have played quite a few of these in my time, but none that interested me much until more recently, starting with Katawa Shoujo. Before I get into it at all, I would like to address something that is pretty serious concerning this visual novel. I have heard people say that this game is gross because it depicts sexual scenes with characters under the age of 18, and while I can't seem to find any of the characters' ages listed on the official website, the wiki lists all of the characters that you can have sexual encounters with as 18 or older, with the exception of Misha, who doesn't have any age listed. That information could be incorrect, but the entire time I played through the game, I was operating under the assumption that these characters were all over 18, as I will continue to do. I want to make that very clear. I would like to expand upon this topic a bit more later as well. With that out of the way for now, Katawa Shoujo is a Bishoujo style visual novel that was made by a group of 4chan users under the studio name 4 Leaf Studios, a clear reference to the site where these people came together to create the game. To my knowledge, the original concept for Katawa Shoujo was by an artist going by Raita, who at the end of a doujin they made, added a bonus page with sketches of 5 characters along with a short synopsis for each, which became the basis for 4 Leaf Studios to go off of. A particular 4chan board saw the sketches in 2007 and began development, eventually releasing a full game in 2012 after approximately 5 years of development. I could go on, but I would rather this video not be me reading the wiki, though I do find it rather interesting that this game was created off of some sketches and built up by those interested in the concept. Katawa Shoujo follows our main character Hisao after his heart attack and ensuing diagnosis with arrhythmia, which leads to him being transferred to a school for the disabled, where he meets our main cast of characters and love interests. Now I am fully aware the topic of disabilities can be a sensitive one, so I will try my best to choose my words carefully, but I will be using the language and terminology the game uses for the most part. Our story starts off with a boy named Hisao speaking with a young girl on a winter day. This young girl confesses that she has feelings for him, and Hisao has feelings for her as well. Before he can share that though, Hisao collapses in the snow, suffering from a heart attack. We rejoin Hisao in the hospital, him waking up to be told a diagnosis of what caused the heart attack, arrhythmia, a condition that affects the heart, as he wasn't aware of it and went untreated, leading to the heart attack. Hisao is not thrilled about this turn of events, and rightfully so. He stays in the hospital for months on end and develops a liking to reading during his stay. Hisao's described this time as being very depressing, and all he wants is for things to go back to the way they were. Thankfully for Hisao, after recovering enough, he is able to leave the hospital and attend a school for the disabled, as it has a much more extensive medical office near the live-in dorms. Hisao isn't too happy that he's been moved from his old school to a new one, pointedly one for disabled people, but it's better than the white walls of the hospital, right? On his first day at being at this new school, he meets each possible love interest and other characters that have bearing on the story later on. Our main romanceable characters are Shizune, Lily, Hanako, Rin, and Emi. Shizune and Lily are deaf and blind respectively, Hanako has burn scars, Rin is missing her forearms, and Emi's legs are only to the knee. There's also Misha, and while she isn't exactly romanceable, she still is a main character, and will be mentioned occasionally in reference to Shizune's route. Misha is also the only main character who doesn't appear to have any disability. After meeting the girls, you find that there's a festival going on soon, and the rest of the prologue is mostly about spending time with each girl and assisting them with their own preparations for the festival, each of them having different duties. Who you choose to help, and other choices you make will lead into different routes, or a bad ending. There's a good chance you'll get the bad ending your first time, unless you're using a guide. Katawa Shoujo translates to cripple girls or disability girls. A fitting name, as the visual novel is about just that. Girls with disabilities, as each of the romanceable characters has a different disability. While I don't want to go into details of each love interest route for spoiler reasons, I think it's important to mention a few things about them and their routes. Lily's the first route I played, and I absolutely adore her and her route. This is the first visual novel route that has made me cry since Megumi from 10 Days with My Devil. I was 12. Shut up. And of course I'm not going to spoil her route, especially due to that. I will say that her interactions with Hisao regarding their disabilities is my favorite in the game. Lily is very open about her blindness, and when Hisao says things like, "I see," and promptly apologizes, she tells him that he doesn't need to change his way of speaking for her. I think that's the one exchange in this game I remember the most, as it really struck me. I appreciate that type of writing. I played Hanako next since her route partially intersects with Lily's. Hanako is a lot of people's favorite, and I totally understand why. She's shy and socially anxious, and a lot of people can relate to that, even if hers is a much more extreme version of what most real-world people would have. I enjoyed Hanako's route a lot, as it had a lot of observable character growth for her, and a lot of really cute scenes with her and Lily. I love their almost sisterly bond. After Hanako, Shizune was my next target. Now, Shizune herself didn't really appeal much to me. Her visual design is fine enough, I like her glasses, but her personality is not really my type. The only way I can think of to describe her is a smart hard-ass. Her and her route are often considered the worst in the visual novel due to Shizune's personality and the endings being less than spectacular. While Misha doesn't get her own route, I want to mention her because she's my favorite character. She's obnoxious and I love her. Also, she's either lesbian or bisexual canonically. This makes me happy. Rin's route is the one I remember the least, if I'm being honest. I feel like despite how much I like her as a character, her route was often very slow and not boring, but the drama is more subtly spoken due to the nature of Rin's character. Emi's route was the one I did last. Discord, shut up. Funny enough, her route is often the first one people do, as it is the easiest to get onto. Honestly, I love Emi. She's a spunky, motivated girl who refuses to let her disabilities get her down. Sometimes her stubbornness is to her detriment, but I think her route showcases a lot of character growth within Emi, on an equal level with Hanako. Now, I would like to mention a few issues others took with the visual novel. I think having an open discussion about these things is important, as a lot of these topics are very sensitive in nature. Firstly, Emi. Despite being canonically the oldest character, she is portrayed as being quite small and youthful, to say the least. If you look at Emi's sprites alone, I don't think they're all that bad. Sure, she looks young, but a lot of this could be attributed to that anime cutesy art style that was, and is still, very popular. Nothing that made me feel particularly uncomfortable. It's once you start looking at the illustrations where an uncomfortability presents itself. Emi, in a few of her illustrations, looks uncomfortably young. I think it's pretty clear that a few different artists worked in different assets for this visual novel, which is not uncommon for larger scale projects, so I bet the sprite artist and CG artists were totally separate. Whoever drew the CG in particular, whether intentionally or not, made Emi look like a child. Thankfully, in any of her explicit illustrations, she looks much more like a petite young woman rather than a middle schooler. I'd also like to mention that I am aware that in anime and other media created in Japan, having a technically adult character look very young is common and relatively acceptable to many, due to cultural differences in the age of consent there being typically lower than what it is in places like the US or UK. I'm not going to have a debate on the morals of these things, but I thought making a mention of it and giving a bit of information would be helpful to those who are going into this visual novel. Another issue has been, many might think that the girl's disabilities would be fetishized heavily, but I'd argue that isn't quite the case in this game. I'd like to say firstly, none of the routes really make the girl's disability the main focus. Hanako's route does focus on it much more than the others, but is usually focused on her trauma from the incident that caused her scars. There isn't a whole lot of sexualizing the disabilities either, at least from what I could tell. There aren't any moments in particular that I remember making me feel as if a lot of attention was being drawn to the disability. When attention is drawn to the disabilities, it's mostly in the early part of the story, as our main character Hisao first interacts with our love interests. The writers handle it well, I think, beginning with Hisao being a lot like many of us who have never been around people with disabilities, tiptoeing around the topic for fear of being offensive. As the story goes on, he gets to know the boundaries of each individual and becomes more comfortable talking about their disabilities as his own. I think for this type of story, the amount of attention placed on the disabilities is appropriate. And the biggest thing I want to mention is a trigger warning. Now, as mentioned, there is sexual content in this game. You can turn it off, but for those who want to keep it on, I will issue a warning for Hanako and to a lesser extent Shizune's routes. Hanako has one explicit scene in her route, and it is uncomfortable. Despite it being consensual, Hanako doesn't really appear to be enjoying it, and there doesn't seem to be much communication between Hisao and her about if she's still okay and comfortable. I definitely don't think this is an assault, or supposed to be looked at as one, but I think a warning should be issued regardless. Shizune's route also has a scene that is a little uncomfortable, but the other way around. Shizune basically gives Hisao no way to communicate with her, tying his hands behind his back, and considering she's deaf, and he knows sign language at this point in the story, they can't communicate anymore. I repeat that I don't think this scene was supposed to be a display of assault, but the circumstance of this being their first intimate moment together and Shizune not explicitly asking if she could advance the situation as she did, could cause some discomfort for the reader. So, some final thoughts. Katawa Shoujo has become one of my favorite visual novels. I acknowledge that there is some issues, but I think the whole of this is a wonderful product. I fully believe that this is a labor of passion and love, and that the creators should be proud of themselves. From the music to the writing, everything about Katawa Shoujo drips effort, love, and emotion. If you would like to play Katawa Shoujo for yourself, it's totally free. A link to the website will be in the description. I would also like to just do a self-plug real quick that me and a friend of mine recorded a podcast talking about some of the more questionable things in this visual novel. I'll link that too. Anyways, I'm Rin Salamander, and thank you for watching. Visual noggles.